It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it.
This is the hour of doom
and bloom.
That's right, friends and neighbors. Welcome to the Doom and Bloom Survival Medicine Podcast, a fortress of fortitude in an unfortunate world. I'm Joel MD, that old Dr. Bones, and I mean old, and I am the founder of doomandbloom.net, a survival medicine website with over 1,300 articles, podcasts, and videos on medical preparedness.
And I'm Amy Alton. I'm an advanced registered nurse practitioner and a certified nurse midwife, and I'm also known as Nurse Amy.
That's right, and she's the hostess with the mostest, the purveyor of quality medical kits over at her store at store.doomandbloom.net. And she's so hot, she still can't build a snowman down here.
Well, we're in South Florida, so it's not really possible anyway.
Well, that may be a factor, but she's pretty hot. Now, what you're watching
Speaking
here...
of hot, this thing keeps your coffee super hot.
Yes, Yeti. It's called Yeti, which
Yeah,
is funny
have you
because
noticed?
it's the same name as our microphone.
That's true, but it's not the same company, I don't think.
I don't think so either.
I don't think so.
What you're watching here is an experiment. We're going to see if this video podcast is going to cure my Alzheimer's disease, otherwise known as old-timers disease. I am losing brain cells at an alarming rate.
Me too.
No,
it's okay.
not
No,
you.
Yeah.
You're young.
Yeah, no, we walk into rooms and we're like, why did we walk in here?
I have done that many times.
How many times today have we done it, though, already?
Once I've done it once today. But I will do it
I
more
did it
often
once
than-
today, too. I did, too.
So this is a drastic measure. We're going to see if it cures me. We're going to give it a try. I should let you know that this is a clinical trial. Our first video podcast was there. It was meant to be an experiment to determine if being exposed to us and our videos is lethal. And it turned out it is not lethal to actually watch our videos. That's right. This is
hope not. Oh,
this
my
is
goodness.
now our second trial, or second podcast, where we're going to try to find out is if exposure to us makes you nauseous. And so
How
hopefully
about it turns on our printer?
it turns out who is printing something.
Nobody pushed anything. Our printer is printing randomly.
Okay. It might
Oh,
be
you
a
know
message.
what it's printing? It's printing the information for the show.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to go get that while you talk.
All right.
Be right back.
Even though this is a new video podcast, we have been on YouTube at the Dr. Bones Nurse Amy channel for quite a long time. I hope you'll subscribe. Also, we are on, where are we on? We're on Facebook.
We were on Parler, but there is no more Parler.
I know, that is pretty crazy.
We're on MeWe.
We're on MeWe. We have, our group is called Survival Medicine on MeWe.
And you don't have to do capitals. What you have to do when you search on MeWe, search in it, and then your first results will give you members. So what you have to do is look over to the left side and go down and click on groups, because the first results is members, and obviously there's no one named survival medicine. So go to the second search, which will say groups. When you push on that, survival medicine will be the first result.
So feel free to join our group there. We also have a
Yep.
group at preppernet.net. That is Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy, it's called.
Yep.
And that's a great place to ask questions, and we support the folks at PrepperNet.
It's
for
really
starting.
growing.
Yeah, and it is growing.
Really growing a lot.
lot of
Yeah.
different groups, and especially in North Carolina, but all over the country.
Super nice people too,
Really
really.
good people too. You can find our audio podcast at blogtalkradio.com.
That one has 10 years, over 10 years.
Yes, and of course our website at Bloom and Doom.
Bloom?
Doomandbloom.net. Oh my God.
You know what? We want to emphasize the bloom.
Yes.
So maybe we should change it to bloom and bloom.
Bloom and Bloom.
Bloom and bloom.
Or Boom and Bloom. Well, we're actually
Have
here.
more hot coffee here. Burn my lips.
This is actually a show that's going to talk about survival medicine. So you're going to get more than just a conventional medical wisdom from us. You're going to get a lot of unconventional medical wisdom, especially on today's show. So whatever it takes to make you medically prepared, that is our mission. So we are actively licensed medical professionals. We'd like to keep our licenses, so you have to listen to this.
To this disclaimer. All information and opinions voiced on the Survival Medicine podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not represent medical advice for anything other than post-apocalyptic settings. We strongly urge our audience to seek modern and standard medical care whenever and wherever it is available. Please.
That's right. Hey, it's 2021, and over the last year, we've seen the most productive producer of fish antibiotics, something that I've written about for many, many years, actually stop manufacturing their products. That was Thomas Labs, and this is all probably related to pressure from the FDA, which has stated that they are increasing their stewardship of animal medications and other veterinary equivalents in the future, and they have already started doing that. This, they say, is because of antibiotic resistance issues, and sure enough, there are a lot of issues with antibiotic resistance, and we have to definitely deal with that. By the way, 80% of antibiotics are not actually given to humans, but are given to food-producing livestock. And the funny thing is that it's not given to them because they got an infection and they needed an antibiotic. It's given to them because, for some reason, antibiotics, if given to food-producing livestock, makes them grow faster and get to market sooner. And there are countries that don't allow that, and I hope that we, like Denmark, and I hope that we, at one point or another, stop giving antibiotics to our food-producing livestock just to get them to
as a
make
routine,
a buck faster.
Is the problem is they're being given this on a routine basis. They're not being given it because they're ill. They're just being given these antibiotics on a routine basis. So they're cutting back on that practice, hopefully. So we'll start seeing a lot less antibiotic meat in our system, and fish too. But I also want to add something about Thomas Labs. I did find out from Fishmox, fishflex.com, wrote to us, and he said that the state where they have their manufacturing, or their bottling company, I should say, not manufacturing, told them they weren't allowed to be bottling these antibiotics.
All right.
So they got pressure, like you said, down the line, from the FDA to the state to them to not bottle it.
I knew it was political pressure, and a lot of that, besides just antibiotic resistance in general, is reports of people using these veterinary medications in normal times. And everything that we write about is meant for long-term survival scenarios when you're off the grid as a result of some terrible thing that's happened.
When people like us aren't around.
That's right.
Right? The doctors and the nurses and the nurse practitioners, because I can write prescriptions, are not around to evaluate you in the system that you're used to. We'll be off grid. So we really want to emphasize that these things that we talk about are not for right now.
Antibiotics are not candy. I mean, they're basically something that must be used judiciously, and they should be used under the supervision of a qualified medical professional if there is one around.
Right.
If there's not a functioning medical system or infrastructure because of some long-term disaster, and that's what we write about.
What are you going to do then?
That's right.
You either learn how to use them properly when you have to, or people will die.
So you can save a lot of lives, possibly two, if you were the medic in a long-term off-grid situation by getting a copy of our books. The antibiotic book called Alton's Antibiotics and Infectious Disease, our survival medicine handbook. It talks about antibiotics, all the different types. And you don't have to buy our books to actually get this information. It's absolutely free on dozens of articles at doomandbloom.net. Since these are no longer available, at least from this particular company, we're going to talk about where you go from here if you want to have some of these in a you-know-what-hits-the-fan situation.
Right.
Everybody who might be the end of the line medically really needs to have something that's going to be able to take care of infections. I mean, I'm talking about situations where the ambulance is heading in the other direction, the rescue helicopter's not on the horizon. And if you can't imagine something like that happening, well, neither can almost everyone else. That's the thing. But it could definitely happen. It can happen anytime, anywhere. If the death rate from COVID was 10% instead of less than 1%, it probably would have happened already.
Oh, my gosh.
That's actually a pretty interesting question. What do you think out there would have been the percentage death rate?
Scary.
What's the percentage death rate do you think out there would have caused our modern medical system to collapse?
I'm going to say it's definitely not 10%. I think it's closer to probably 5%.
Really?
Yeah. Only because if you think about the hospitalization rates at 5%, our hospitals would have been overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And what happens is it would have just sort of fallen in on itself, because as the nurses and the doctors who originally weren't sick become sick and it spreads, thankfully most of them who did become sick didn't pass, but 5% of them are now also the patients. And so now you have less ICU and doctors and nurses. I mean, you can have a labor room nurse, but she might not do real well in the ICU taking care of a COVID patient. Right. So then you've got to cross-train all these people. That exposes even more people to the disease. Even more people get sick, overload the hospital even more till eventually it just can't sustain itself. There's not enough healthcare workers to take care of the number of patients or even the number of beds or ventilators. I mean, what we're seeing in, I think it's Brazil in some of these towns, particularly one of them began with an M. I can't remember. Manaus.
Or I may not be pronouncing it right.
They had a meltdown. They literally had a meltdown. The hospitals became overwhelmed. They couldn't accept anymore. They ran out of oxygen. If you can imagine a hospital with people who need respiratory help running out of oxygen, and you can look it up. There are horror stories out there of nurses and doctors watching patients just die, and there's nothing they can do.
You have to have a system to deal with the dead bodies too.
Right.
And you have to have personnel to deal with that. Things that
right.
we don't have here.
Right.
Obviously, you would have to actually put something like that together at a time when there were a lot of people sick, and it just would pile up.
So my feeling is it probably only needed to be 5%. It happened with 5% of our nurses and doctors who were already becoming overwhelmed. I mean, it just you have too many patients and not enough medical staff, so that leaves people outside. Mm-hmm. I mean, that leaves them in the parking lot, or just take them back home. There's nothing we can do. We don't have a place to put them. We don't have a ventilator. We don't have oxygen. We don't have anyone to look at your loved one whatsoever. I do think it only needed to be about 5%. Knock on wood. As bad as COVID has been, and we're certainly not going to say that it hasn't been terrible for a lot of people, it could have been possibly worse. If this thing mutates, we talked about mutation last show, but if this thing mutates into something not only more highly contagious, because it's already done that, mutates into something that's more deadly, and we get a 3 to 5%, we get close to there, this is a disaster beyond what anyone can possibly imagine.
So about a decade ago, I was the first physician to write about the storing of these fish antibiotics and bird antibiotics, and using them as a tool for the medic in long-term survival situations. I believe that then. I believe that now, even though the supply of them is no longer from the same distributor. We're going to have to figure out a way that you can still have some of these on hand in case of infections in a prolonged situation. This only matters if you believe that there is something that may come down the pike, some major, huge disaster that could possibly occur.
Or a completely different virus.
Right.
Or a completely different bacteria that we've never dealt with. Right. The problem for the human population is that these things that are happening are different than what we've ever experienced before.
That's true.
When we have viruses that are similar to things we've been exposed to before, we have some immunity, some form or level of immunity.
That's called antigenic drift.
The problem for humankind is when we have an exposure to a virus or a bacteria, which can be lethal. Obviously, if it just gives you a cold, who cares? But, has some lethality that we've never had exposure to. Nothing similar to it at all. And then it starts going through the population.
Or a previous virus that has shifted
so
significantly
much, right,
because of mutations. That's called antigenic shift.
So then it's not a cousin anymore. It's a sixth cousin.
Distant relative.
Sixth cousin, if you can imagine all of those generations, if anyone's done their ancestry. So we're lucky that the virus that we're getting exposed to now, if it does change, hopefully it won't change very much, even though it's more contagious. Hopefully COVID will not become more deadly. That's our hope.
Viruses, in my opinion, are going to be the pandemics of the future.
Yeah.
Okay. And the problem is that when we lose a modern, advanced medical infrastructure, if something like that happens, then bacteria are going to come back. There used to be malaria epidemics in places like Savannah and New Orleans, and yellow fever, things that you would expect in third world countries used to be not that uncommon.
Right, they were
in the
here.